Hello everyone and welcome back to our virtual Mishnah Berurah share. We're holding in Mishnah Berurah Chelik Vav. We'll be learning today Mirz Hashem Daf Chav Zayin Amud Aleph. We are continuing to learn Hilchas Tisha B'Av, and we begin today in Siman Tav Kuf Dun Aleph in the midst of Sif Yud on the bottom line of the Shulchan Aruch on Chavav Amud Beis with the words of the Ramah. So yesterday, in the beginning of Sif Yud, we learned about the minig not to eat meat and not to drink wine. The Mechaber brought down different opinions. Let me take that back. The Ramah, the Mechaber in Sif Tes brought down three different opinions. Either not to eat meat and drink wine during the Shavua Shachal B'Ai, the week of Tisha B'Av, or from Rosh Chodesh until after Tisha B'Av, the 9 days, which is our accepted minig. Or there are those that don't eat meat and drink wine during the entire 3 weeks, beginning with Shiva Asar B'Tammuz. Now, here in the Ramah, says the Ramah, bottom line, Chavav Amud Beis, Haga, V'naragin lahachmir, there is a minig to be stringent, Shaloi lishtais yayin bebirkas hamazayin, not to drink wine even by a kais over benching, V'loi b'havdalah, and not on Motzei Shabbos by havdalah, Ella, rather, noistim latinoik, rather you should give the wine to a child. Let's take a look right away in the Mishnah Berurah. Says the Mishnah Berurah on Chavav Amud Beis in Ois Katan Samud Ches. V'nayagin lahachmir, the minig is to be stringent and not to drink the wine of Birkas Hamazon, of benching, or of Havdalah. Says the Chavetz Chaim, Kevan de Efsher limitame latinoik, since you don't have to drink it, you could give this wine to a child to drink instead of drinking it yourself, so why should you drink it? Masha'en kein b'shar sudais mitzvah. This doesn't apply. We're going to see that by a sudas mitzvah, you're allowed to drink wine. So by a sudas mitzvah, there's an inyan of being misamerch by the sudas mitzvah to drink wine. You can't fulfill that by giving it to a child. But by havdalah or by birkas hamazon, so you benched over a kais or you made havdalah over a kais, you made a bari priagafen, somebody has to drink the wine, otherwise it's a bracha levatala. But you don't have to drink the wine, you can give it to a child to drink. So by giving the wine to a child to drink, you fulfill what you need to fulfill. So why not do it? Why should you drink the wine during the 9 days? So that's why we have over here v'noigin lahachmir shaloi lishtais yayin b'birkas hamazon v'loi b'havdalah. Says the Mishnah Berurah as Katan Samach Tes shaloi lishtais yayin b'birkas hamazon pashut dechol zeh mayri b'birkas hamazon dechol. When the Ramah says that the minig is not to drink yayin by birkas hamazon, not to bench over a kais and to drink the yayin, that's talking about during the week. If you had a suda during the week and you benched on a kais, you shouldn't drink that wine. Rather, you should give it to a tinok. Aval bebirkas hamazon de Shabbos shel shalosh seudais. But if you benched over a kais by shalosh seudais on Shabbos, and now you want to drink that kais, you don't have to give it to a tinok. It's Shabbos, and on Shabbos you're allowed to eat meat and you're allowed to drink wine. Pshita deshari. Obviously, that's mutter. Ois katan ayin. The Ramah said, don't drink the kais yourself. Ela noistim latinoik. You give the wine to a child. Now let's understand. When you make havdalah al hakais. The Chachamim are mesakin that the same way by kiddush you make kiddush al hakais on a cup of wine, so to havdalah is made al hakais. Now since you're making it al hakais, you make a bari priagafen. To make the bari priagafen and not to drink the wine would be to make a bracha levatala. You can't do that. So somebody has to drink the wine. But you yourself don't necessarily have to drink the wine. You could make a bari priagafen, and you might see the child. The child hears the bracha. He says amen. Now you give him the wine to drink. He drinks the wine. As long as somebody drinks the wine that the bracha was recited over, it's not a bracha levatala. So the eitzah over here is, since it's wine and it's during the 9 days, we don't want you to drink wine, so you make the hagafen. The child hears the hagafen. He says amen, and now the child drinks the wine. Now the Mishnah Berurah says here, nice katan ayin, ela noistim latinoik, shehigia lechinuch. It has to be a child, It has to be a child, shehigia lechinuch, who is old enough that he has reached the age of chinuch, and I believe what the Chavetz Chaim means over here is, he reached the age of chinuch for berchas hanenin, the age at which you're already mechanech a child that he has to make a bracha before he eats something, and he should understand the concept of a bracha, that he's getting something, all of his food, all of his drink comes from Barei Olam, it comes from the Rebbeinu Shalom. And like the Gemara says in Brachas, if you eat something or drink something, you derive pleasure in this world, and you don't thank the Rebbeinu Shalom for it first, you don't ask rishus from the Rebbeinu Shalom by making a bracha, it's kilu geizel me'akadosh baruch hu miYisrael. It's like you're stealing chas v'chalila from the Rebbeinu Shalom and from Klal Yisrael. So a child who's reached the age where he can understand the concept of a bracha, because the whole reason you're giving him the yayin to drink is so that the Bari Priagafen should not be a bracha of HaTorah. So the child who's drinking the wine in order to fulfill the requirements of the bracha has to understand what a bracha is. Also, I think over here, it has to be a child that's higia lechinuch for the concept of havdalah. You're making havdalah, this is the kaish shel havdalah. He should also have an understanding of what havdalah is. And the Poskim seem to say that this is a child of around 6 or 7 years old. So you need a child that's higia lechinuch, says the Chavetz Chaim, and then the Chavetz Chaim says v'yish der roiv hakos, and the child should drink the majority of the kos. Now, why does the Chavetz Chaim say that you have to drink roiv kos, the majority of the kos? I believe the reason is because a stam kos, when we talk about a kos, we're usually talking about a kos that holds a revius. Most of our kosais hold a lot more than a revius. But a stam kais, remember, we're also talking about a day and age when most of the Yidden were living in poverty. So they didn't use a larger kais than they needed to use because they didn't have wine to waste. So they made a kais that was the proper size. That's a revius. Now, a roiv revius, the chinuch, the Sefer HaChinuch says that a roiv revius is a mole lugma. Mole lugma literally means a cheekful. Now, the minimum amount of wine you have to drink by havdalah or by kiddush is a mole lugma, which is a roiv revius. And if your kais is a revius, it's roiv kais. So when the Chavetz Chaim says here that the tinuk should drink a roiv kais, what he means is a mole lugma. The child should drink a mole lugma, which is the majority of a revius, because that's the amount that you have to drink in order to be yotza havdalah. Now, in our terms, so a revius, depending on the exact chair, if you go with Reb David, Zechet Tzaddik V'Kadosh L'Vracha, I still have to get used to saying that. If you go with Reb David's shiurim that he wrote in the Haggadah by Pesach, so he has different shiurim for revius, somewhere between 2 ounces and 3.5 ounces, somewhere around there would be a revius. Here we're talking about a roiv revius. Okay. Now the Chavetz Chaim says, there's another requirement with the age of this child. V'dafka im lo higia adayin lehisabel al Yerushalayim. You need a child that's old enough that he's higia lechinuch for the concept of Birchas Hanenin and for Havdalah, but not old enough that he should understand what it means to mourn over the Beis Hamikdash and Yerushalayim. If he's old enough, lehisabel al Yerushalayim, then he has no business drinking wine during the 9 days. The same way you can't eat meat and drink wine during the 9 days. If you're dealing with a child that's old enough to be misabel on Yerushalayim, he also should not be eating meat or drinking wine during the 9 days. So it seems that you need a child over here that's somewhere between the age of 6 and the age of 8. He's old enough to understand the concept of bracha rishona. He's old enough to understand the concept of havdalah, but he's not old enough to really understand to be misabel on Yerushalayim. And that's why he could drink the wine. Continues the Mishnah Berurah, V'dafka bazeshu mitzvah. It's only over here when we're talking about havdalah, we're talking about Birkas Hamazon, when there's a mitzvah to drink the wine, that's when we say that you could give the child the wine to drink. Ava b'loy mitzvah, but to drink wine shaloi b'makom mitzvah. Even if he's a tinoik, even if he's a child that really hasn't reached the age of mourning over Yerushalayim, still aser b'basa v'yayin kishu bari. If he's a healthy child who has no reason why he should be drinking wine, so then he's aser. He's not allowed to drink wine or eat meat. A weak child, maybe there's a reason why he has to eat meat. I remember when I was a young child, I must have been 8 or 9 years old. I remember going with my my mother to the pediatrician, and the pediatrician discovered that I was slightly anemic. So the pediatrician told my mother, I want him eating meat for supper every night. So my mother said, he's not going to eat meat every night. He's not going to be interested in eating meat. So the doctor looked at her, and said, give him hot dogs. If he wants to eat hot dogs, give him hot dogs. If he wants to eat burgers, give him burgers. But I want him eating red meat every night. He has to build up his iron. That was the renowned pediatrician from Borough Park from years gone by, Dr. Schmier. So that was his. So if you have a child who is not healthy, who has a need to eat meat, he can eat meat. But a healthy child has no business eating meat or drinking wine, shaloi b'makad mitzvah, during the 9 days. Okay, so let's go back into the words of the Ramah, top line, Chav Zayin Amud Aleph. So the Ramah said, we give the wine of havdalah to the child. Uvemakim deleka tinoik, if we don't have a child to give the wine to, mutter ba'atzmai lishtais havdalah, then the individual himself, the adult, is allowed to drink the wine of havdalah during the 9 days. Says the Mishnah Berurah Katnayin Aleph, lishtais havdalah. Aval birkas hamazayin yavarich b'loi kais. But benching, if you don't have a child that you could give the wine to, then don't bench al hakais. Don't do birkas hamazon al hakais. Kevin the yesh paiskim, since we have paiskim, da'af shloisha shachlo ain't tzarech kais. We have paiskim that hold that there's no chiv to make birkas hamazon al hakais. Even if you're benching b'mizumin, you don't have to have a kais. I'll call panim yesh lismay. So if you don't have a child, if it's during the 9 days, and you don't have a child to give the ayin to, so rely on these paiskim and don't bench ala kais. It's better to do that than to bench ala kais and have the adult drink the wine. Now, halacha lamaisa, when it comes to havdalah during the 9 days, what do you do? It's very interesting. The Rishiva Zatzal, Rav Moshe Zecher Tzaddik V'Kadosh L'Vracha, writes in the Igris that an adult, the one who makes havdalah, could drink the wine and there's no need to give it to a tinoik. This Ramah, the Ramah says very clearly, give it to a tinoik. So the Rishiva Zatzal writes something very interesting. The Rishiva Zatzal writes that when the Ramah said that you should give the yayin to a tinoik, that was talking about in the days of the Ramah, when he says the minig was to make havdalah on beer. Most people did not make havdalah on wine. So since it wasn't common to make havdalah on wine, the Ramah said, if you are making havdalah on wine, so go ahead and give the wine to the tinoik. Let the tinoik drink the wine instead of drinking the wine. But Rav Moshe writes, nowadays everybody makes havdalah on wine. If everybody makes havdalah on wine, then the Ramah would not have said that everybody should make havdalah on wine and give it to a tinoik to drink. Rather, Rav Moshe writes that the adult who makes havdalah is allowed to drink the wine. And I've seen that that's the way my Rebbe, Reb Ruvain Zol Zayin Gesund, Reb Ruvain makes havdalah during the 9 days. He drinks the wine. When I was growing up, so in earlier days, I remember my father, Olav Shalom, making havdalah during the 9 days on coffee. The halacha is that if you don't have wine, you can make havdalah on chamar medina. Now the Rishiva Zatzal writes, to define chamar medina, he says chamar medina is a chashuv drink that you would give a guest. If a guest came to your house and you wanted to be mechabed him, it's a drink that you would give a guest to be mechabed a guest. So the truth is, a coffee, a lot of times people come and they say, oh, let's sit down and have a cup of coffee. So my father, Olav Shalom, used to make havdalah on coffee. Later on, he stopped making havdalah on coffee. And the two reasons that I remember why he stopped making havdalah on coffee, one was because he felt that instant coffee is really water. That's all it is. It's you take a teaspoon of this instant coffee, which who knows what it is. A chemist once told me, he was a chemist, he was an ink chemist. His job was in ink. But he was a chemist by trade. He told me that instant coffee has nothing to do with coffee. He said that by the time they finish taking the coffee beans and grinding the coffee beans and cooking the coffee beans and chopping up the coffee beans, and they cook it in order to turn it into this instant coffee. By the time they finish doing everything that they do with it, it has very little coffee flavor until they go ahead and they spray it with something and they give it an artificial aroma, and some of the taste he was saying is artificial. But my father felt that instant coffee may just be water. And the Rishiva Zatzal writes in the Igris that water, even if water would be Chamar Medina, if somehow you lived in a place, maybe if you lived in a place where there was a very weak water supply, where water was in very limited supply, maybe you would actually be mechabit somebody with a cup of water. So even if Evian water will become Chamar Medina, the Rishiva Zatzal writes water cannot have a din of Chamar Medina. You can't make havdalah on water. So that was one reason. Another reason why my father wasn't so happy with using coffee was because, especially, he liked a very hot coffee. If you have a very hot coffee, you sip it. Now, for havdalah, you need to drink a shear. You need to have a malilugma, and you need to drink the shear in a quick way. You can't take 10 minutes to drink the shear. That's not kedei achilas pras. So my father, Al Rishon, was worried on a coffee, am I going to drink a shear right away? So then he started making havdalah on beer. Beer is Chamar Medina. You mechabit somebody with a beer. Come, let's sit down, let's have a beer. So he would make havdalah on beer. Many years I made havdalah on beer. Then I heard in the name of Reb, I never asked him this straight, but I heard over in the name of Reb that he wasn't happy with making havdalah on beer. Reb held that beer, it seems Reb holds, and I heard this from another paisik today. I still haven't asked him personally. Maybe if I get a chance, I'll ask him. He's not happy with the idea of beer being considered Chamar Medina. He feels that beer is not really something that you're mechabed a guest with. Beer, the way he put it, supposedly, is that's for truckers and bums that sit down and drink a beer together. It's not a mechubadik drink. Now, nowadays, we live in a day and age where there's a lot of craft beers and choshev beers. So maybe with those kind of beers, maybe that's different. Maybe he's talking about a Bud Light. I don't know. But so it seems he's not happy with the idea of using beer, and therefore I started using wine, and I started drinking the wine myself, even though that's not what my father, Ola Shalom, did. But I think that that's a very common minig that a lot of people have, that they do use beer. Okay. Now continues the Ramah. Right? We did Ayin Aleph. Okay, continues the Ramah on the second line. Ubisudas mitzvah. How about if you're making a sudas mitzvah? Kigon mila, you have a bris mila, the suda of a bris. Upidyon aben, the suda of a pidyon aben. V'siyum mesechta. Or, very common, somebody is making a siyum on a mesechta, that's also considered a sudas mitzvah. Usuudas erisin, or the suuda that you make to celebrate a kedushin. So then, oichlim basar, you're allowed to eat meat, v'shaisid yayin, and you're allowed to drink wine. And we're going to pause here for a second, and let's take a look at the Mishnah Berurah Ois Katan Ayin Dalit, Ayin Beis. Ubesudas mitzvah, if you're celebrating a sudas mitzvah, then you're allowed to eat meat and you're allowed to drink wine. Says the Chavetz Chaim, Ubazeh afilu kaichel birkas hamazon yesh lahater lishtois. By a sudas mitzvah, you're making a bris, you're making a pidyon aben, or even if you're making a siyum and you're washing by the siyum and you want to bench al hakais, you want to do birkas hamazon with a kais, you're allowed to, and you're allowed to drink the kais. Because the Ramah is telling me that by one of these sudas mitzvah, you're allowed to serve wine by the suda. You're allowed to drink wine by the suda. So if you're allowed to drink wine by the suda, you're certainly allowed to make birkas hamazon al hakais and drink the kais shel birkas hamazon. That you're certainly allowed to do. Ois Katan Gimel says the Chavetz Chaim, the siyum mesechta. If you're making a siyum on a mesechta of Gemara, that's a simcha, that's a sudas mitzvah, and you're allowed to eat meat, and you're allowed to drink wine. Nevertheless, says the Chavetz Chaim, and this is very interesting. If you didn't arrive at this siyum during the normal course of your learning, you should not hurry up your learning or delay your learning so that the siyum should fall out during the 9 days. That's not appropriate, says the Chavetz Chaim. So if you're learning Daf Yomi, and you're going to finish the Masechta on Tu B'Av, or you're going to finish the Masechta on the 13th of Av, don't go ahead and say, hey, listen, I'm going to finish the Masechta a couple of days after Tisha B'Av, I'll learn a little bit faster. I'll do 2 blot today, and then I'll be able to make a siyum during the 9 days. I'll hasten up my learning so that I'll be able to make the siyum during the 9 days. The Chavetz Chaim says, no, that is not appropriate. Also, if you're not the type of person who makes a suda when you make a siyum, so then then maybe you shouldn't make a suda during the 9 days. And in essence, what the Chavetz Chaim seems to be saying is, yes, it's true. If you're making a siyum is a sudas mitzvah. And if you're making a sudas mitzvah during the 9 days, you're allowed to eat meat, you're allowed to drink wine. But don't go ahead and push to make a siyum during the 9 days so that you should be able to eat meat and you should be able to drink wine. The Aruch HaShulchan, I don't have the, you know what? I think it might even, I don't have my Aruch HaShulchan here. I left it downstairs in my study, but I think it's here, the Dirshu footnote. You know what? Let's do Dirshu footnote number 89. He goes through this. Let's see number 89 here. So the Chavetz Chaim said, Lo yemaher o ya'acher b'shvil zeh. You should not hurry up or delay your learning in order to make a siyum during the 9 days and to eat meat and to drink wine. Mikar Dvarav, the source for this halacha that the Chavetz Chaim brings is Medivrei HaElya Rabbah, Re'ei Sharet Tzion Siv Kat Nayin Tes, like the Sharet Tzion says, and Ois Kat Nayin Tes, Ubir B'Shalos Uchuvas Minchas Yitzchak, Shekavanasai, the intent of the Elya Rabbah is, L'mi shema'acher oy makdim es asiyim liyamim elu, somebody who is delaying, somebody who is delaying or hastening es hasiyim, his siyum, liyamim elu, to these days of the 9 days, ki ritzaynoi lechel basar, because he wants to be able to eat meat during the 9 days. So somebody says, I'm going to be tired. I'm not going to want to eat cheese blintzes and mac and cheese and scrambled eggs the whole 9 days. I want to eat meat during the 9 days. So I'm going to hurry up my learning, or I'm going to delay my learning so that I can make a siyum during the 9 days to eat meat. Shaba'ifin zeh, the Shalos Chuvas B'Chas Yitzchak Dain Weiss says, Shaba'ifin zeh, nire she'en loy simcha b'siyum ha'masechta. It makes it look like the siyum is not actually a simcha for this person. The person is not celebrating the siyum because he mamish has a simcha from the fact that he's making the siyum. Ela b'achilas basar. The real reason, the real simcha for him is the eating meat. So he's delaying his siyum. If he would have a simcha from the siyum itself, so then he would make the siyum as soon as he can make the siyum. That's when he would make the siyum. Why is he delaying the siyum? He's delaying the siyum because really what he wants is he wants to be able to eat meat during the 9 days. So that's the real simcha. Ve'en zu sudas mitzvah. In that case, Dayan Weiss says it's not a sudas mitzvah. Sharei ikar mitzvah zeh simcha shebasiyum ha'masechta. The reason it's a sudas mitzvah is if you're being misameach from the fact that you were Messiah ha'masechta. Ach, al misha siyum mesechto mishayim ma'at laisis hasimcha siyum bizman sheyoyse noyach loy v'roy loy laisis hasiyum. If the person is delaying the siyum because you can't make a siyum every day of the week. There are certain people you want to have by your siyum. You want to have your parents maybe by the siyum. You want to have your in-laws by the siyum. You have a best friend you want to have by the siyum. And they can only make it at that time. So to delay the siyum for that reason, that makes sense. So that would be a sudas mitzvah. So I think what he means to say over here is, if you want to delay it because that's the appropriate time, that's the best time for you to make a siyum, so okay, so then if it falls out during the 9 days, so you'll make the siyum then during the 9 days, and you'll have meat and you'll have wine. I didn't delay it to the 9 days because I want to eat fleishiks during the 9 days. I delayed it during the 9 days because that's when the people that I want to have by my siyum could come to my siyum. V'chein kasav Aruch HaShulchan, and this is why I really turned to this footnote, is because I wanted to quote the Aruch HaShulchan. Excuse me. V'chein kasav Aruch HaShulchan, shemi shemeniach hasiyim esekta dafka liyamim elu k'dei lechol basar. Somebody who delays a siyum for the 9 days because he wants to eat meat during the 9 days, Says the Aruch HaShulchan, davar mechurhu. That's something which is disgusting. During the 9 days, the reason we don't eat meat, the reason we don't drink wine is because we're misabel on Yerushalayim, we're misabel on the Beis HaMikdash, and now you're going to go ahead and you delay your learning because you want to make a siyum then, but dafka because you want to be able to eat meat. And it even degrades like we said in the beginning of the footnote here, it degrades even the simcha of the siyum. It looks like your whole purpose over here is to eat meat, not to celebrate the siyum. It's just to eat meat. So the Aruch HaShulchan says that that's a davar mechur. Chosif. However, this is very fascinating. However, the Aruch HaShulchan adds on and he says, "Shalilmoid lechatchila mesechta." That if you set out initially to learn a mesechta, Kidei lasei siyum b'yamim elu, in order to make a siyum during the 9 days. So let's say it comes out, it's right after Shavuos, it's you're holding it Sivan, and you look at the calendar and you say, Sivan Tammuz of, wow, I have about 3 months over here. You know what? If I go now and I chazer Baba Kama, maybe I'll be able to make a siyum on Baba Kama during the 9 days. And we'll make a nice siyum and we'll grill and we'll have hot dogs and burgers and I'll throw up a steak for me and my wife to celebrate the siyum. So now you're initially planning to learn a Masechta in order to make a siyum during the 9 days. In that case, says the Aruch HaShulchan, Efsher Shekedai. Maybe that's worthwhile. Kevan shal yedei zeh yirba beis HaTorah. Hey, you know what? If that's going to stimulate you to learn extra Torah, if you're going to go ahead and chazer a Masechta now, you're going to be motivated to chazer a Masechta because you want to make a siyum during the 9 days. You know what? In order to be marbet Torah, says Aruch HaShulchan, maybe that's kedai, maybe that's worthwhile. V'agrach Kanievsky, the Stipler Goyen Zatzal. No, I'm sorry, the Goyen Reb Chaim Kanievsky. Yibadol Chayim Siper, he tells over Shesham Amayaviv, he heard from his father, the Stipler Goyen, Shebizman Milchemes Ha'olam Rishayna during World War I, Lo Yahayam Alechel b'yeshiva rak basar. The yeshiva only had meat; they didn't have anything else to eat. V'asu ha'bachar b'chol suda siyum. So the bachar got together. The bachar went, and by every suda, a bachar made a siyum so that they should be able to eat meat. V'chol yeshiva achla basar. Urei b'sefer Nitei Gavril, the Sefer Nitei Gavril brings down Shehevi Minig Gedoylei HaChasidus. The Nitei Gavril is a compilation of Piskei Halachos from the Chassidish greats. So he brings down Minig Gedoylei HaChasidus Larach b'yamim elu siyumim v'oichlim basar v'yayin v'hevi shan tamei haminhagim. A lot of the Chassidish Gedolim, they bedafka went ahead and made siyumim to eat meat and wine during the 9 days. I think one of the reasons that's brought down for this is because when you make a siyum, first of all, again, you're being marbe b'Torah. And the schus of Torah could be megan on Gans Klal Yisrael, like I keep on saying, at the end of every shir, and especially during the 9 days, we need extra shmira. So we want to be marbe b'Torah. In a sense, if you look at it, if you can imagine that in every bungalow colony and in every camp and in every community, people are getting together and they're making siyumim on Masechtas every night during the 9 days. So there's a ribui in the ruach of Torah and in the asik of Torah. Everything is Torah, Torah, Torah. Another Masechta, another Masechta, another Masechta. Somebody's making a siyum on a Seder Mishnayos. Another person is making a siyum on Shisha Sidrei Mishnah. Another one is making a siyum on this Masechta, on that Masechta, on a Chazar Masechta, on a new Masechta, on Shas. So everybody's talking about siyumim. So there's a lot more Torah going on. I also saw brought down that people get together and they invite friends and they invite relatives, and that's marbereus. People get together with their friends and with their neighbors, and one of the things that we're concerned about during the 9 days and during this time period is sinas chinam. So one way to take away from sinas chinam is if you have constantly this sudas mareus, you have people getting together and having sudas together, that runs counter to sinas chinam, which is also something that we want during the 9 days. Now, Lamaisa, See, for me, I have yahrzeit during the 9 days. So I always go to make a siyum because I want to make a siyum on my father's yahrzeit during the 9 days. I know in Yeshiva Staten Island's camp, already during the days of the Yeshiva Zatzal, we make a siyum. The yeshiva makes a siyum for the bachurim every night so that they should be able to eat fleishiks until I think the 6th day of the 9 days. Once we hit the 6th day of the 9 days, they don't make siyumim anymore. But one of the things that the Yeshiva Zatzal said was that the yeshiva can't serve milchiks to the whole yeshiva night after night after night after night. It just doesn't work for the tzibur. So there's another reason why they have to have meat. And therefore he said that they could make siyumim. And what happens is bachurim plan to make siyumim. And there's a different bachur. The Yeshiva Zatzal used to come down to the siyumim. Reb Ruven comes down to the siyum every night during the 9 days. It happens to be, it's a beautiful thing. You have all the rabbeim sitting over there, and the bachur comes and makes a siyum on a mesechta, and they drink a l'chaim, they have wine, and then they have fleishik. Sometimes they make something special for the Messiah, that he should have something choshev. So it happens to be, again, it's really a celebration of Torah. So it happens to be, it's a nice thing too. Okay. Now, there's also some interesting questions. Did we finish? Let's finish Mishnah Berurah is Katan Ayin Gimel. I'm going to read it from the beginning. If the siyum doesn't arrive during the 9 days, during your regular course of study, you should not prepone or postpone. Yeah, prepone is a word, by the way. You shouldn't prepone or postpone your learning so that the siyum should fall out during the 9 days. If you if you're not in the habit of celebrating a siyum with a suda, then don't suddenly wake up to make a suda with meat and wine during the 9 days. But if the siyum does fall out during the 9 days, even people who didn't learn with you can take part in the siyum. If these are people that you would normally invite to your suda. So you don't go ahead and call up your neighbor that you have nothing to do with. You shouldn't have a Yiddish from a neighbor that you have nothing to do with. But if you have a Yiddish from a neighbor that you have nothing to do with, who never eats by you and never joins you for anything, and now suddenly you say, hey, you know what? I know he's tired of milchiks. I'll call him over to the siyum so he can have a hot dog. No, you only invite people that you would normally celebrate with. That's who you invite. And that's why they say also that when it comes to yeshiva, so all the bachurim are considered one mishpacha. You have, let's say, a camp like Yeshiva Staten Island's camp, where you have the bachurim and the young galite that together all year. They all know each other. So yeah, one person could make a siyum, and the whole camp could go ahead and eat fleishiks and partake of that siyum. But in other cases, it's not that way. If you're in a bungalow colony and you have nothing to do with the fellow who's in unit 29B, and you never say hello to him, and you never have anything to do with him, and now you're going to make a siyum, and he's going to go grill based on your siyum, no, that's not appropriate. Even, let's say, in a girls' camp, I don't think, you could ask a paisik, I don't think this would be appropriate in a girls' camp. One man who happens to be in the girls' camp because his family is there, he's going to make a siyum, and 300 girls are going to eat fleishiks based on his siyum. There's no way he would invite these 300 girls ever to his siyum. And you're going to call him a family member? Sounds schwach to me. Certainly there's another, I've heard that in hotels they do this. They make a siyum for all the guests to be able to serve all the guests fleishiks. To me, that's highly questionable. I don't understand it. It doesn't make sense to me. Okay. Now we go to Ois Kat Nayin Daled. Usudas Erison. Now this is a very strange Ramah. The Ramah said another example of a Sudas mitzvah where you could serve meat and drink wine is a Sudas Erison, the celebratory meal of a Kiddushin. What kind of Sudas Erison? We already learned that you're not allowed to make a Sudas Erison during the 9 days. So what kind of Sudas Erison? So it says the Mishnah Berurah is cut 9 daled after mavur le'el b'sif beis. Even though we just learned previously in sif beis to also last Sudas Erison, you're not allowed to make a Sudas Erison during the 9 days. So what Sudas Erison is the Ramah speaking about? Efshar, it's possible, says the Chavetz Chaim, the Mairi, that the Ramah is referring shaloi b'shas Erison, to a Sudas Erisin that's not done at the same time as the Kedushin. We said that a real Sudas Erisin is a Suda that takes place at the time of the Kedushin. They make the Kedushin and then they sit down and they make a Suda. Or they make a Suda and they make the Erisin, they make the Kedushin in the middle of the Suda. But if you have an Erisin on Sunday and you make a Suda to celebrate it on Monday, that's not really called a Sudas Erisin. And that's mutter. So, after the Ma'ari Shalom B'Shas Erisin, Oy Shalom B'Beis Harusasai, or he's not doing it in his in-law's house. He's making a Sudas Erisin without his kala. He's doing it outside in a hall somewhere away from the house. The Leka Simcha Kolkach, that's not called a true Sudas Erisin. It's not such a big Simcha. The Yesh, and the Chavetz Chaim says there are those, Shemoichikin Elu Shnei Tevos, who erase this Sudas Erisin from the Ramah. They say it's a typo and it doesn't even belong here. Okay. Now continues the Ramah on the bottom line. And this, we already started speaking about this. So the Ramah said, if you have a Sudas Mitzvah, like a Bris Milah, Pidyon Ben, a Siyum, a Sudas Erisin, you could eat meat, you could drink wine. Who, bottom line of the Shulchan Aruch, Kol Hashayachim L'Suda. Everybody who is appropriate, everybody who has a connection, a reasonable connection to this Sudas Mitzvah. Says the Mishnah Berurah, Kanayin Hey, Kol Shayachim L'Suda. How do Kol Misha Yahilich Bizman Acher L'Suda Zu? Who is appropriate to the Suda? People who, if this wasn't Av, if it was happening in Nisan, or this was happening in Shvat, these people would come to this Suda. Those are the people that have an appropriate connection to the Suda. Hein machmas kurva, whether they're relatives, or machmas shuhu oyhavoi, or their beloved friends, the nashim hashayachas l'suda, and women that have a connection to the Sudas mitzvah, b'makim shederek lezamnam l'suda, if it's in a place where this is the minig, that they would invite these women to the Suda, then gamken mutter, then they could also come and they could partake of meat and wine. But if the women have no place there, if the women would normally not come to such a thing, so then they shouldn't be partaking of the siyum. So I think even a siyum, if you're the type of person who you do make a celebration where you make a siyum, but who do you invite? You invite your chavrusas, you invite the guys from the shul, you sit down and eat a pastrami sandwich together. So then what are all your friends' wives doing there? You would never invite your friends' wives to the siyum. Some people would. Okay, if you would, you would. The Kosav HaChayyadam, the Chayyad writes to Eshes Habal Suda, the wife of the one who's making the Suda, Muteres Af B'Siyum Mesechta, she could eat meat and drink wine, even when you're making a Siyum, because your wife is part of your learning. V'chein Banav, and your children, your sons. Umisha Shalcha Le'Lebeisai also Le'Lecho, to send a pastrami sandwich to your neighbor to celebrate your Suda, your Siyum, that Yizicha can't do. Now continues the Ramah, Aval yesh letzamtzem shaloi lahoisif. You shouldn't add on to the guest list for the Sudas mitzvah, people who you wouldn't normally have. Says the Mishnah Berurah, Got Ayin Vav shaloi lahoisif. Hainu mi shaloi ba machmas kurva. Somebody who wouldn't ordinarily come because he's a relative. Oy avas reim, or because he's a good friend. Rak lechel v'lishtois. You're just inviting him to give him an opportunity to eat meat and drink wine. Va'avera hu biyadai. It's an avera in their hands. They should not be joining. They should not be eating meat. They should not be drinking wine. I think this is something that people are abused a little bit. People hear, oh, there's a siyum. They run to go here to siyum so that they can go grill and have a steak. That's not appropriate. It's not an excuse to have fleishiks. That's not what a siyum is. A siyum is a celebration. So if you're an appropriate part of the celebration, it's okay. You're allowed to do that. You're allowed to celebrate. It's a beautiful thing to celebrate a siyum. But not just to have an excuse to go eat meat and drink wine during the 9 days. Okay, we're going to stop over here. We'll continue with Hashem tomorrow in the middle over here of Sif Yud. Thank you so much for joining me for limud HaTorah. The schus of limud HaTorah, the schus of the Torah Akdosha, should be Megan on Gans Klal Yisrael. People really have to realize, you read the news, what's going on, and you read about this pandemic, the vaccine. I don't think it's an accident. Nothing that happens in the world is an accident. As soon as the vaccine came out, and as the vaccine becomes more available, you're having more and more variants of the virus are coming out, and people are wondering if the vaccines are going to cover those variants. Ein oid milvadoi. There's nothing to have faith in other than the Ribbono Shel Olam. And we say in Berachos Kriya Shema every morning, one of the praises that we give to the Ribbono Shel Olam is that He and He alone is the Borei Refuos. The Ribbono Shel Olam is the creator of a refuah. The Ribbono Shel Olam is the one who will bring the refuah and end the pandemic. It won't be Pfizer. I'm not dissuading people from taking the vaccine. The psak halacha that I have and the psak halacha that I heard was if you're eligible to get the vaccine and you have the opportunity to take the vaccine, you should. That's the psak halacha that I heard from Reb Ruvain. Reb Ruvain told me if you're able to get the vaccine, you should get it. My cousin Reb Asher Weiss, from the biggest place in Eretz Yisrael, he also said, so they were pashut by him, if you have the ability to get the vaccine, you're mechuyev to get it. So I am not saying don't get the vaccine, but what I am saying is get the vaccine, but realize that the vaccine is ishtadlus and ishtadlus only. The Ribbono Shel Olam is the Borei Refuos, and the Ribbono Shel Olam is the one that will bring an end to this. And the Ribbono Shel Olam should help in the schus of limud HaTorah. We should all be mechazik in limud HaTorah. We should be mechazik in Torah, in tefillah, and in mitzvahs. And in the schus of that, the Ribbono Shel Olam should bring the end to all of these tsaras. And the Ribbono Shel Olam should send Yeshuas, Refuas, and Parnasa to all those in need. And we should be zeicher to see the Bias Gal Tzedek b'meher v'yameinu. Amen. Be well.